December 8th, 2021, Clarksville, Tennessee. It's a chilly night in this historic community, about 50 miles northwest of Nashville.
Clarksville is a mid-sized city, which only has about 160,000 people, and it's on the eve of the holidays. So it's bright, it's cheery.
You got Christmas decoration in the yard, lights hanging from the houses.
But at 8:42 p.m., the peaceful night is interrupted by the sound of gunshots on the city's east side.
A bunch of phone calls started to flood the police station.
This is 911.
I think I heard a shooting. I heard a gun going off. Pop, 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 pop.
I heard about 10 loud bangs that sounded like gunshots, not fireworks.
Someone is in the middle of the street been shot. It's a male. Black male in the dream. Hurry, hurry, hurry.
Police and emergency responders mobilize.
They're dispatched to the scene. Neighbors are frantic. Everyone runs out to the street to see what just happened.
A man was faced up in the middle of the street. His body was riddled with bullet holes.
I heard shots. And I'm like, where's my cousin? And then we came out to find him and it was him.
First responders learned the victim is 17-year-old Armani Majors.
Armani Majors was a Nashville native who was currently living with his aunt's family in Clarksville.
Everybody loved him. He's always happy-go-lucky.
Armani was a young man becoming an adult. He was doing well in school, and he was doing well with his family.
So how's work been going?
Really good. I'm actually taking on some extra hours this week also.
I'm so proud of you.
He had a job at a fast food restaurant, and he was proud that he was earning money. He also knew how to prioritize things that really mattered to him, like God and family.
He and his family were very active in their church.
At his high school, Armani's outgoing personality made him popular amongst his peers.
He was very handsome, very charming. He was a lovable young man. He was very popular, but most importantly, very sweet, kindred heart.
But Armani held a special place in his heart for one particular classmate, 18-year-old Miracle Bailey.
How you doing?
All right, how you doing? Come on.
Good. I miss you today.
I missed you too.
They met each other early on in their high school years.
Miracle was a lot like Armani, and they instantly hit it off. They were very chill, and they vibed together.
Now, you want to come over after school today?
Yeah.
Okay, we can do that. Okay, cool.
They were just like two peas in a pod. She was a female version of who he was, and they stayed together throughout a long period of time. They were your typical high school students, and they dated from freshman year all the way to senior year.
The future was looking bright for both of them.
They were doing good. They were just moving everything in the right direction.
But just 4 months into his senior year, Armani has been gunned down in front of his relative's home.
They realized that he was not only shot once in the head, but he was shot multiple times all over his body. The chest, his hands, his back.
They found 14 shots in Armani's body.
Armani's injuries are so severe, nothing can be done to help him.
Ultimately, he succumbed to his injuries, and they could not save his life.
Armani was already dead.
We're gonna need a homicide here immediately.
When homicide detectives arrive on the scene, they too are struck by the viciousness of the crime.
Looking at Armani, the numerous gunshot wounds in his body, the thing that stuck out about it, besides the multitude of them, would have been how dispersed they were. The one that sticks out foremost in my mind is one through one of his fingers, which is consistent with putting up his hands in front of his face because of how rapidly the assault and murder took place.
Surrounding Armani's body investigators find numerous .40 caliber shell casings.
The glisten of the street lights, you could very well pick up a lot of the shell casings that are out there.
But Armani doesn't appear to have been robbed.
All his belongings are still intact.
So it certainly spoke to a personal element. You're looking at somebody that knew this victim.
"17-year-old Armani Majors may have been young, but he was already making a big impact on those around him."
His life was flowing. It was just flowing.
He was a high school senior who also worked at a local fast food restaurant. He had lots of friends and family that loved him.
But Armani's short life has come to a tragic end after he's gunned down in front of his Clarksville, Tennessee home.
Armani had been shot 14 times.
Investigators don't think this crime was a robbery gone wrong.
All his belongings are still intact.
When investigators pat down Armani's body, they found a small bag of marijuana as well as $50 of cash.
Could the marijuana be a clue to the killer's motive?
It wasn't a lot to go by, but they were trying to take any lead that they necessarily could, and they was thinking, could this be drug-related?
Investigators also locate a cell phone nearby.
They're not sure if it's Armani's phone or if it's a phone belonging to a potential suspect.
Then, investigators notice something unusual: tire tracks cutting across a nearby lawn.
It looks like the gunmen might have turned their vehicle around in the neighbor's lawn when they fled away from the scene. Unfortunately, there are only slight impressions in the grass, so the officers are not able to track them to a specific type of wheel from a vehicle.
In their search for answers, detectives turn to Armani's devastated family members.
There were a number of family members that showed up. It was a full house of love and support there.
I just can't believe this is happening.
They were completely distraught, but they were able to get themselves together enough to be able to tell detectives what they knew.
They were just with Armani moments before the shooting took place.
According to Armani's family, the shooting occurred after a trip to the grocery store.
They were putting groceries away when Armani got a video call on his cell phone.
Come on now. Let's get this stuff put up.
What's up? Hey.
So, did you come in outside?
Unfortunately, they didn't know who called Armani. They just noticed it was a female.
He had told his aunt that he was walking down the street and that he'd be right back.
Hold on. Hey, I'll be right back, okay?
Okay, honey. Come on, let's get this stuff put up.
That was the last time they saw him alive.
Right after Armani walks outside, they hear shooting. By the time they ran outside to check on Armani, the shooter was already gone.
It all happened so fast.
The family confirms the cell phone found at the scene belonged to Armani.
Investigators are eager to send the phone out for forensics.
Maybe they could identify who was he talking to when he got the phone call to come outside.
After speaking with the family, investigators canvassed the neighborhood for witnesses.
They spoke to a neighbor named Jackson Shepard, who lived right across the street from where Armani was shot.
Okay, Jackson, tell us what happened.
Jackson tells detectives around 8 p.m. he heard gunshots and went outside to see if anyone was hurt.
As he stepped outside, he saw a black Jeep Cherokee speeding away.
Then he saw Armani.
He saw Armani lying in the street, and he rushed to him to render aid.
He didn't just stick his head out of the door. He came out to attempt to save Armani's life.
After speaking with Jackson, Police issue an all-points bulletin to law enforcement throughout the county.
I want to put out an APB for a black Jeep Cherokee. I want all patrol officers keeping an eye out for that vehicle.
And within minutes of sending out the alert, they catch a lucky break.
They were able to locate the vehicle and immediately started a high-speed chase.
Tennessee detectives are investigating the deadly shooting of 17-year-old Armani Majors, who was gunned down in a hail of bullets outside his aunt's home in Clarksville.
A neighbor witnessed the shooter speeding away from the crime scene.
I want all patrol officers keeping an eye out for that vehicle.
Just moments later, Montgomery County Sheriff's Police spot the black Jeep Cherokee.
Deputies viewed that vehicle traveling at a high rate of speed not far from the crime scene. Those deputies moved forward to pursue that vehicle.
And they attempt to initiate a traffic stop. However, the vehicle doesn't stop when the sirens come on. Instead, they started to pick up speed.
The officers pursued the vehicle in a high-speed chase, bobbing and weaving through the heart of downtown Clarksville.
Then in a residential area at Ernest Shelton Drive in Lincoln, the vehicle comes to an abrupt stop.
Two suspects jumped out of the vehicle and take off on foot.
The passenger of the vehicle takes off in one direction while the driver runs off in a completely different direction.
Officers are forced to make a split-second decision on whom to pursue.
This is common with most vehicle pursuits. When multiple people flee from the vehicle, officers are going to try and go after the driver of that vehicle on foot.
Unfortunately, the passenger was able to evade capture.
But the driver isn't so lucky.
Stop!
Eventually, they were able to corner him.
Hold it right there, boy. Keep your hands up. Keep them up, keep them up, keep them up, man. Hold it.
They were able to handcuff him and take him into custody. They quickly identified him as 18-year-old Nashville resident Robert Holland.
And as they retrace his steps, police find more evidence that suggests Robert is Armani's killer.
They discovered a Glock handgun directly in his path of flight.
It's a .40 caliber, which matches the shell casings located at the crime scene.
When investigators process the car Robert has been driving, they make another alarming discovery.
The vehicle ended up actually being stolen.
3 days earlier, a man had reported the vehicle missing, alleging that a woman he met at a local hotel robbed him.
She also made off with his cell phone and wallet, but he never got her real name. She only went by the nickname of Barbie.
Could Barbie be the second assailant, the one who evaded capture? Investigators search the inside of the vehicle for more clues.
As soon as they open the door of the car, they're hit with the smell of marijuana. Then the police noticed a substantial quantity of what appeared to be crack cocaine hidden under one of the seats.
They also found 13 rounds of .40 caliber ammunition and a 9mm magazine.
But that's not all.
The thing that stuck out on that black Jeep was an orange fingernail in the front passenger floorboard of the vehicle.
So now detectives start to wonder, could this belong to the female who stole the vehicle?
Was she also the woman that called Armani just a few moments before he was shot?
So, did you come in outside?
Armed with this new evidence, detectives have a lot of questions for the driver of the stolen Jeep, Robert Holland.
I was able to return to our Special Operations Homicide Unit where I knew that Robert Holland was already seated in an interview room and waiting to be interviewed. Very first thing that stuck out to me about Robert Holland was the very bright red pants that he was wearing.
Cool talk with us, so we can talk about why you're here. Yeah, I want to know why I'm here. Yeah, I'm cool with talking to you about why I'm here.
Right off the bat, Robert denies everything, the shooting and the car chase. Robert insists that he was just in town visiting one of his cousins.
Mostly, when I come up here, I just be chilling, like getting away from my little brothers and sisters, you know, just chilling.
He even says he was not even in the getaway car. He was just at the wrong place at the wrong time.
I never even rode his car to me. I don't know nothing about no shooting.
Robert Holland's initial story was that he was just walking to the local convenience store to purchase Black & Mild, and the police started chasing him.
Yeah, I seen police running through the field. Naturally, I just got scared, really, and went crazy.
Robert also has an explanation for the black ski mask he was wearing when he was arrested.
You put a ski mask on now? It's really for my asthma, though. It's even because I don't be breathing cold weather.
The detectives don't buy his story for 1 second.
You have to push through the lie, and a provable lie is something that's paramount in any interrogation. So it was easy to prove that you were driving a vehicle because 2 law enforcement officers saw you jump out of a vehicle with bright red pants on, ran after you for less than a minute.
You're wearing bright red pants, man. Like, that's the worst pants to wear when you're going to try and run from the police.
Investigators are certain that Robert is guilty. But who is his accomplice?
The other individual who fled from the scene is still nowhere to be found.
And detectives are no closer to getting that information from Robert. After a high-speed chase through the streets of Clarksville, Tennessee, police have a suspect in the murder of 17-year-old Armani Majors, a fellow teenager named Robert Holland. But Robert is refusing to play ball.
You were driving a car that was stolen and fled from the scene of a murder. You did that. Listen, no, you did.
Robert wasn't the only suspect inside the getaway car that night, but he refuses to give investigators any information on his accomplice.
Once it's clear that the officers are not going to get anything else out of Robert, they end the interview.
But they keep Robert in custody as they continue to work the case.
Several questions still remain here. Who was the other individual inside the car, and why did they want Armani dead?
Fortunately, the forensics team is able to crack the code to Armani's cell phone.
I could see an Instagram profile that he had been chatting with, and I took note of the name Barbie Doll Mir.
Could this be the same Barbie that stole the getaway car?
They were using vanishing mode on the app, which means their messages disappear automatically after they were read.
Still, Detective Hughes could see that Barbie Doll Mir was the last person Armani was in contact with.
Barbie Doll Mir video called Armani minutes before he was killed.
And immediately after the shooting, she changed her profile name.
Barbie Doll Mir changed her username to Mir2Shiesty and blocked Armani's account. To the detectives, this type of behavior was highly suspicious.
So in trying to figure out who this young woman was, investigators took note of the fact that both usernames included the letters M-I-R.
A lot of folks in their usernames have some vestige of their actual name in it if they don't use their full name already. Miracle was the name that another investigator thought off the top of their head that would start with Mir. And it was a simple narrowing down of a likely age range.
When searching their criminal database, one name stands out from the rest: 18-year-old Miracle Bailey.
Miracle actually had a gun charge from a few weeks prior.
Police waste no time reaching out to their new suspect.
I had sent detectives out to her home, and she consented to come down to the police station for an interview.
Miss Miracle? Yes, sir. Need water or anything?
As Detective Hughes sits down with Miracle, there's something about her appearance that immediately jumps out to him.
During my time interviewing Miracle Bailey, I had made note of her orange fingernails, of which she was missing 3 or 4.
They're the same type of acrylic orange fingernails as the one police found in Robert Holland's stolen getaway car.
The fact that it was in the floorboard of the front passenger seat gave more credence to the fact that she was in that vehicle.
You're already aware that we're investigating the shooting, I guess. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
In the interview room, Miracle tells detectives that she's already aware of the shooting that took place.
She says her sister is the one that told her the tragic news.
My sister texted me and was like, K7 got shot. She was like, yeah, he died. And I'm like, what?
So, he's a K7?
Mm-hmm.
K7 was a nickname that Armani sometimes went by.
Miracle tells Detective Hughes she and Armani were once high school sweethearts.
How long did y'all date?
He was on and off for 4 years.
But according to Miracle, they finally called it quits for good a few months ago.
We just broke up because he was cheating on me, whatever. Like, he had a lot of girlfriends.
Regardless, Miracle says the two of them remained friends.
We just started being cool. We were cool. We wasn't dating.
She suggests that one of Armani's other ex-girlfriends may be to blame for his death.
Miracle shares that what's going around on social media is that Armani was killed by his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend.
Her boyfriend posted man down on Instagram.
You know her name?
No, I don't know her at all. She posted like right after. She posted a video of her and some dudes in the back of the seat. And he had the gun. He was like flashing the gun in the video.
And you saw the video yourself?
Yeah, I seen it.
However, Miracle isn't able to provide any proof that this video exists.
Detectives begin to pick apart her story.
They asked Miracle why did she change her Instagram username right after the shooting.
She maintained that it was not an irregular thing for her to do to change her Instagram profile name.
I'm always with my username.
But Miracle denies ever blocking Armani.
She says a lot of people have the password to her account and could have done it.
Detectives then share with Miracle that they are fully aware that she was the one who was video chatting with Armani around the time he was killed.
Hey.
Hey. You coming outside?
Miracle is like, so what?
I told him goodnight when he hung up. I didn't hear no gunshots, no nothing.
But detectives still aren't buying Miracle's version of events.
Detectives begin to dial up the pressure on Miracle, and she starts to change her story.
That led to some truth coming out in that interview.
Still wouldn't even have it. No.
Like what?
She admits that she knows at least one person who would want to hurt Armani.
K7 had gotten pregnant at all. And he hated K7's good. He hated his gut.
Hours after 17-year-old Armani Majors was gunned down in Clarksville, Tennessee, detectives are speaking with his ex-girlfriend, Miracle Bailey.
Miracle denies having anything to do with Armani's murder.
But she admits she does know someone who had a grudge against him.
Because there's only one person I know. Like, but I don't think yeah.
Who?
He was my, I was saying he's my boyfriend, but he's not my boyfriend. And he hated, because K7 had gotten pregnant at all. And he hated his family good. He hated his gut.
Miracle's new man is no stranger to police.
What's his name?
They call him Little Rob.
Little Rob, as in Robert Holland.
She confirmed that Robert Holland went by that name and that he was her boyfriend. And that obviously was what connected these two individuals together.
According to Miracle, when Robert found out she had gotten pregnant by Armani, he was furious.
Did you have a baby?
I had a miscarriage. And
So Lil Rob hated him for that?
Lil Rob hated him, period.
And when Robert learned Miracle was still maintaining a friendship with Armani, even after her miscarriage, it only fueled his anger.
The thing about Lil Rob, you know, it's like you really don't want to get on his bad side. Like, something wrong with him.
But investigators think Miracle is more involved in what happened to Armani than she's letting on.
I'm not talking to inside your head. Now's the time for the complete truth.
Finally, Miracle caves to the pressure.
Okay, this is how he did come to me, but it was right now. We went to Wendy's.
While she and Robert were out, Miracle says she got a text from Armani.
Is that him? You texted him in my face.
Robert was furious and thought that Armani was trying to make moves on his girl.
Rob seen me. He got mad at me. Started arguing. He was like, you with the all that. You know, don't, Then we had a big old argument, guys.
You know I don't even like this dude, bro.
Just take me home, okay? Take me home.
All right, say that. We out.
I told him to tell me off. He did.
According to Miracle, after she got home, Robert called her.
What do you want?
He told me to call K7
And tell him what?
and tell him that I'm gonna be on the way. And I was like, what? I was asking him, what you mean I'm on the way? He was like, man, do what I say.
Miracle had claimed being on the phone with Robert Holland that Robert Holland's intent was to go sell him some gas, as she referred to it, which is known to be bad or fake marijuana.
I was like, what y'all on? He was like, it's cool, we squashed it. You want some gas? I'm gonna serve him.
Miracle says that she thought Robert was just going to go there to finesse Armani out of his money by selling him fake drugs. She says she never thought that he was actually going to kill him.
He knew he wasn't going to sign those bonds, man. They hate each other.
No, but listen, I've never seen it happen before. And you can probably think I'm lying, y'all lied in the past, but I'm honestly giving y'all the whole truth right now.
Miracle admits that she did lure Armani outside, but she claims Rob made her do it.
He told me to tell him from outside. He told me to do it.
Where were you at?
I was at home.
After sending some messages back and forth with Armani over Instagram, Miracle made the video call to him.
Hey.
So, is you coming outside?
Hold on. Hey, I'll be right back, okay?
Okay.
Hey, I'm coming out now.
All right, I see.
But after hanging up with Armani, Miracle says she got a bad feeling.
She couldn't get a hold of Robert for the next several minutes.
I just felt something was right. Then he wasn't calling back. I didn't know that he was setting him up there. I promise you, I didn't know.
However, Miracle admits she stole the car that Robert drove on the night of the murder.
Tell me the circumstances behind you taking that guy's car.
Okay, so we was at a hotel and we drinking and stuff.
How'd you meet him?
On Facebook.
At a particular point, she felt uncomfortable.
You wanted to do what?
He wanted to, you know, like.
Have sex?
Yeah, and I was like, I didn't so confused, like.
So Miracle devised a plan.
So as he in the shower, I'm like, okay, what I gotta do, I just have to get the keys.
So while he was in the shower, you got to get up and...
Her response to that situation was to take the vehicle and leave from the hotel.
After wrapping up their interview, detectives begin digging deeper into Miracle's story.
Through forensic examination of her cell phone and her social media accounts, we were able to recover messages that were sent between the victim and Miracle Bailey.
Once Instagram came back and was able to produce the vanish mode messages, it shows in order how she had basically set the plan to have him ambushed.
She is actively trying to lure Armani out of his home where he is safe and direct him to the spot where he is subsequently shot and killed.
In the DMs, Miracle is insistent that Armani be alone.
In the messages, it is very clear that Miracle wants Armani to come outside alone, and she says this several times.
GPS data also confirms Miracle's culpability, putting her at the scene of the crime.
We were able to mirror GPS coordinates recovered from Miracle Bailey's phone with the vehicle pursuit itself.
GPS data shows Miracle in the getaway car as Robert sped away from the scene of the shooting.
Her phone, being the GPS tracker, allowed us to literally see the foot pursuit where Robert Holland was taken into place.
Hold it right there, boy. Put your hands up.
On December 13th, 2021, investigators charged the couple with Armani's murder.
Robert Holland and Miracle Bailey are both charged with first-degree murder.
And as the trial draws near, prosecutors get a helping hand from the last person they expect, Robert Holland himself.
When he made a phone call from the jail, Rod basically confessed the murder.
Please don't about me.
In Clarksville, Tennessee, teenagers Robert Holland and Miracle Bailey are facing charges in the murder of Miracle's ex-boyfriend, Armani Majors.
What set this case apart for me was that the victim was 17 years old and that the suspects were 18. You can tell that this was an act of rage.
During a recorded jailhouse phone call with his mother, Robert is angry and upset after learning that Miracle implicated him in her police interview.
Please don't about me.
What you think you did to Robert?
He had to run home.
To prosecutors, this statement is a confession because he didn't say that Miracle lied on him. Instead, he said that she snitched.
On January 22nd, 2024, Miracle and Robert go on trial together.
When they kicked off the opening arguments, the district attorney, he said this was an ambush, point blank.
The state starts by methodically laying out all the forensic cell phone evidence, including the Instagram video chat.
Through DMs and video calls, Miracle used lies and manipulation to lure Armani outside to see her.
The last message that we have is from Barbie Doll Mirror saying, "Walk up."
According to the state, the evidence clearly shows Miracle lured Armani into a trap.
She was actively trying to get Armani alone so there would be no witnesses and no one to help him.
The persistence of Miracle Bailey in those messages made it very clear that without her, Armani wouldn't have left that house.
Hey. Hey. You coming outside?
Hold on. Hey, I'll be right back, okay?
Okay, honey.
Hey, I'm finna come out now.
Okay.
He genuinely thought he was going outside to talk to his ex-girlfriend.
Armani was just a 17-year-old kid. You get a message from a pretty girl saying, hey, let's meet up, just the two of us. No teenage boy is going to turn that down.
According to prosecutors, ballistics evidence proved it was Robert Holland who ambushed Armani, shooting him 14 times.
I don't think he even saw Robert until it was too late.
Robert Holland's gunshot residue tests come back positive, proving that he was near a firing gun the night of the homicide.
Also, the shell casings came back to the firearm that was recovered from Robert Holland's path of flight.
Robert Holland, he was the one that pulled the trigger. There was just no disputing it.
But why did the couple kill Armani in the first place? Their motive is still unclear.
Police didn't feel like they got the full truth from either suspect.
Just like there's no perfect person, there is no perfect case.
But going off of Miracle's statement, it's possible the motive was pure jealousy. Robert was furious when he found out that Miracle was still in contact with Armani, and together they devised a plan to lure him to his death.
Regardless of how somebody came to be murdered, especially somebody as young as Armani, there's no reason for it at any time. There's no reason to lure an individual out of the safety of their home and in their life just because he talked to somebody at the wrong time.
We'll never know why Miracle went along with it. Only she knows that. But there's no question in the minds of prosecutors that she was just as involved in this murder plot as Robert.
After a 5-day trial, the case goes to the jury.
The jurors only took 3 hours to deliberate, and it was clear who they believed.
They found the defendants guilty of all charges, including first-degree murder, evading an arrest, and joyriding.
They both end up being sentenced to life.
Robert Holland just kind of stared blankly, just really staring at the table, not really moving. Miracle Bailey broke down crying. And likewise, the family of the defendants, they were definitely inconsolable.
High emotions spill out into the hallway outside the courtroom.
There is shouting and screaming. There is pushing. There is court officers diving into the mix, trying to pull people away. And I can distinctly remember hearing one woman screaming, "Burn in hell, burn in hell." And another woman screamed, "Your son and daughter put my brother in the ground."
2 life sentences does not bring back a beautiful smile and a funny young man with his whole future ahead of him. But it certainly is the least that we can do in any death investigation and any homicide, is to do everything we can as investigators to afford the justice that that individual deserves. His family certainly did love, and they miss him every single day.
At first, there was nothing remarkable about the drive. A road stretching through the darkness. A car moving steadily away from Baton Rouge. Miles of asphalt disappearing beneath its headlights, one after another, as Louisiana slowly gave way to the long highway north. Behind the wheel was 50-year-old Tyrone Brazil. Beside him, in the passenger seat, was his wife, Lanessa Bradford. But Lanessa was not asleep. She was dead. According to investigators, Brazil had allegedly shot his wife after the two argued at Independence Community Park in Baton Rouge on August 13, 2026. Instead of calling for help, he allegedly placed her body in the passenger seat and drove away. He would eventually travel more than 350 miles, crossing state lines and spending hours on the road with his wife's body beside him. And for much of that journey, nobody knew. Nobody looking through a windshield in the darkness could see what was sitting inside that vehicle. The car continued forward, carrying the aftermath of a marriage that had, according to people close to Lanessa, been falling apart. The strangest part was not simply that the journey happened. It was that Lanessa had reportedly been planning a journey of her own. A different one. A journey away from her husband. A journey she never got to make. For weeks, according to her close friend Shalika Decker, Lanessa had been preparing to leave. She had reportedly been saving money. She had contacted relatives outside Baton Rouge. She was thinking about how to disappear quietly, how to leave behind familiar places and possessions, and how to make sure she could begin again somewhere her husband would not easily find her. She had apparently reached a point where leaving was no longer just something she talked about. She was preparing to do it. And according to Decker, there was a reason she was afraid. Lanessa had allegedly told her friend that when she talked about leaving Brazil, he threatened to kill her or kill himself. Decker also said that the relationship had changed during the final months before Lanessa's death. What she described was a growing atmosphere of fear and instability. These are allegations and recollections from someone who knew Lanessa, not findings established by a court. But they form an important part of the story because they give a human shape to what happened next. Before there was a police report, before there was an arrest, before there was a body discovered during a traffic stop, there was a woman who was apparently trying to find a way out. Lanessa Bradford was more than the victim whose name would later appear in news reports. Friends described her as kind, supportive, and someone who cared about the people around her. She worked at an elementary school in Baton Rouge. She had a life built around ordinary routines, familiar faces, responsibilities, and relationships. They are the details that make a victim a person rather than a headline. Someone had spoken with Lanessa before she went to work. Someone expected to hear from her. Someone knew how she laughed, what she worried about, what she hoped to do next. Someone knew she was trying to save money and leave. And someone, somewhere, was waiting for her to make it out. She never did. On August 13th, the ordinary world surrounding Lanessa began to collapse. According to Baton Rouge police, Lanessa and Brazil were together at Independence Community Park. At some point, an argument began. The exact words that passed between them remain part of the investigation, but what followed was irreversible. Brazil is accused of shooting Lanessa. She died from a gunshot wound. There would be no second chance to walk away from the argument. No phone call to explain what had happened. No ambulance arriving to take Lanessa to a hospital. Instead, investigators allege that Brazil put her body into the passenger seat of his vehicle. Then he drove. Imagine the contradiction inside that car. A man behind the wheel. A woman beside him who had once shared his home, his marriage, and his life. And a road continuing forward as if nothing had happened. The vehicle did not stop at the edge of the park and remain there. It did not become an abandoned car in a parking lot. It moved away from Baton Rouge and toward Memphis, Tennessee. More than 5 hours would pass. More than 350 miles would disappear beneath the tires. And Lanessa's body would remain inside the vehicle. What was Brazil thinking during those hours? Was he frightened? Was he trying to escape? Did he have a destination in mind? Was the drive planned, or was it the desperate movement of someone reacting to what had just happened? Was he attempting to conceal what he had done? Or was there another reason for taking the body so far from the place where Lanessa died? At this stage, those questions cannot honestly be answered with certainty. They are questions investigators must ask because the journey itself is one of the most disturbing elements of the case. This was a prolonged movement through ordinary America, through highways and towns, beneath streetlights and over bridges, while a dead woman remained in the passenger seat. Every mile created another opportunity for the secret to be discovered. Yet the car kept moving. Meanwhile, back in Baton Rouge, Lanessa's absence would eventually begin to raise questions. She worked at an elementary school. Her disappearance was not simply the disappearance of a stranger from an anonymous city. Her absence was noticed by people who knew her routine. When she failed to appear as expected, concern grew. A welfare check would eventually become part of the chain of events surrounding the case. But by then, Lanessa was already far away. Her body was no longer in Baton Rouge. The woman who had reportedly been planning to leave quietly had been carried hundreds of miles away by the very man she was allegedly trying to escape. Then came Memphis. A traffic stop. An ordinary police encounter that, for reasons no one inside that vehicle could have anticipated, would bring the journey to an end. On the evening of August 13th, Memphis police stopped Brazil's vehicle for a traffic violation. An officer approached. Questions were asked. The vehicle was examined. And then the scene changed. Inside the passenger compartment was Lanessa Bradford. She was dead. The discovery transformed a traffic stop into a homicide investigation. The journey that had begun in Baton Rouge ended not because Brazil voluntarily surrendered, but because a routine stop exposed what had been hidden in plain sight. He was arrested in Memphis and would face the process of being returned to Louisiana. But by then, the central mystery had already emerged. Why? Why had Lanessa's life ended in a confrontation at a park? Why had a woman reportedly preparing to leave her marriage never made it home? Why had her husband allegedly chosen to drive hundreds of miles with her body beside him? And what happened during those silent hours between Baton Rouge and Memphis? Those questions matter because this story is not simply about a body found in a car. It is about the final days of a woman who, according to someone close to her, believed she needed to escape. It is about the warning signs that may have existed before anyone outside the marriage understood how serious the situation had become. It is about a relationship in which leaving was allegedly met with threats. And it is about the terrible distance between deciding to leave and actually being free. Lanessa had reportedly been saving money. She had reportedly been making plans. She had reportedly reached out to family. She was looking toward a future beyond the marriage. Perhaps she imagined another city. Another home. Another morning in which she could wake up without calculating whether leaving was safe. Perhaps she imagined something simple, waking up without fear, making plans without hiding them, and finally having control over her own life. Lanessa believed the road ahead was supposed to mean freedom, not fear. We only know that the future she was preparing for never arrived. Instead, her story ended beside a highway, inside a vehicle traveling north. And the man accused of ending her life was the person sitting behind the wheel. The most haunting image of this case is therefore not the park, not the arrest, and not even the moment police opened the passenger side of the vehicle. It is the road between those moments. Hundreds of miles of ordinary landscape. A vehicle moving through the night. A driver's hands on the wheel. And beside him, a woman who had reportedly spent weeks trying to figure out how to leave. She never reached the place she was trying to go. But eventually, the car reached Memphis. And when police stopped it, the secret that had traveled across state lines could no longer remain hidden. But the story of Lanessa Bradford had begun much earlier, in the quiet moments when she was still alive, still working, still talking to friends, still saving money, and still believing that somewhere beyond the fear, there might be a way out. That is where this story truly begins. Part 2, the setting, before the road, before the gunshot. Baton Rouge does not look like the kind of place where a story like this should begin. The Louisiana capital is a city shaped by ordinary routines. Morning traffic moves along familiar roads. Children arrive at school carrying backpacks larger than their shoulders. Teachers prepare classrooms. Families make plans for dinner. People drive home after work, thinking about bills, errands, tomorrow's responsibilities, and the thousand small details that make up an ordinary life. But ordinary places can hold extraordinary fear. And sometimes, the most important part of a criminal case is not the moment when everything explodes. It is the period before it. The quiet weeks. The conversations held behind closed doors. The changes that friends notice but cannot fully explain. The plans made in secret. the moments when someone begins preparing to leave. For Lanessa Bradford, those final weeks were reportedly filled with such preparations. She was 50 years old. She worked at an elementary school in Baton Rouge, a place where her presence was connected to routine and responsibility. Her days were not defined by crime or danger. She belonged to the ordinary world of work, family, friendships, and obligations. That is what makes the story so difficult to understand. People rarely recognize the final ordinary day while they are living it. A person leaves home in the morning and assumes there will be another morning. Someone sends a message and expects an answer. Someone makes a plan for next week. Someone buys groceries for a future meal. Someone tells a friend, "I'll see you soon." And then, suddenly, there is no next week. There is only the investigation. The unanswered phone. The empty chair. The questions. For Lanessa, according to people who knew her, there had been a growing desire to create distance between herself and her husband, Tyrone Braziel. The details of their marriage remain partly hidden from public view. Many private relationships contain arguments, disappointments, and tensions that outsiders never see. But according to her friend Shalika Decker, Lanessa had begun telling her about things that frightened her. She allegedly wanted to leave. And leaving, according to Decker, was not simple. Decker said that whenever Lanessa talked about leaving Braziel, he allegedly threatened to kill her or himself. That kind of threat can transform the meaning of the word home. A home is supposed to be the place where the outside world stops. The door closes. The noise fades. You are safe. But when fear enters the home, the same walls can become something else entirely. A person may begin measuring every word. Every argument becomes a calculation. Every decision carries consequences. Even a simple statement such as, "I want to leave," can become dangerous if the other person refuses to accept it. Again, these accounts come from Decker and are allegations, not findings established in court. But they are significant because they describe the emotional landscape surrounding Lanessa before her death. According to Decker, Braziel had not always behaved this way. She said he had not previously been physically violent toward Lanessa, but that things changed during the final 2 or 3 months. That period matters. 2 or 3 months is long enough for a person to realize that something has changed. Long enough for fear to become a pattern. Long enough to start thinking about an exit. And long enough for someone who knows you well to notice that you are no longer living the same life. Lanessa reportedly began preparing. Not publicly. Quietly. She saved money. She contacted relatives outside Baton Rouge. She considered leaving behind her vehicle and belongings. The idea, according to Decker, was not simply to move out. It was to disappear. To create enough distance that Braziel would not immediately know where she had gone. Think about what that requires. A person who is planning a normal move might make lists. They might tell friends. They might search for apartments, arrange transportation, pack boxes, and say goodbye. A person who believes she has to disappear has to think differently. What can I take? What can I leave? Who can I trust? Who knows where I am going? Will my phone reveal my location? Will my car make me easy to find? How much money do I need? When is the safest moment? The fact that Lanessa was reportedly thinking in these terms suggests that, at least from her perspective, leaving had become serious enough to require secrecy. She was not simply imagining a different life. She was reportedly preparing for one. And there is another painful question. Did she believe she had enough time? Perhaps she thought she could wait a few more days. Perhaps she was trying to save a little more money. Perhaps she wanted to organize everything before making the final move. Perhaps she was waiting for the right moment. There is often a dangerous gap between deciding to leave and actually leaving. The decision can feel like freedom. But the person is still physically inside the situation. The escape is still only a plan. Lanessa's plan never became reality. To understand why the final day was so devastating, it is necessary to understand the geography of the life she was trying to leave. Baton Rouge was familiar. It was where she worked. It was where she had built relationships. It was where people knew her. And it was also the place where, according to her friend's account, she was trying to create an exit. The city would later become the starting point of a journey nobody could have predicted. Independence Community Park was one of the locations that would become central to the case. On an ordinary day, a public park is a place associated with movement and life. People walk. Families gather. Children play. Vehicles arrive and leave. Conversations begin and end. But on August 13th, according to police, the park became the setting for an argument between Lanessa and Brazil. At some point, the argument escalated. The exact details of what happened inside that confrontation remain matters for investigators and the courts. But the result is known. Lanessa was shot. She died from a gunshot wound. The life of a 50-year-old woman ended there. And the next chapter of the story began with a vehicle leaving Baton Rouge. There is a strange cruelty in the contrast. Lanessa had reportedly been planning her own departure. She wanted to leave. She wanted distance. She wanted to reach another place. Yet after her death, it was Brazil who took her away. Not toward the future she had imagined. Not toward relatives waiting to receive her. Not toward a new home. But toward Memphis, with her body reportedly placed in the passenger seat. The geography of the case therefore becomes symbolic. Baton Rouge was where Lanessa's life had unfolded. It was where she worked. Where she knew people. Where she reportedly planned to escape. Memphis was where the hidden truth would finally be exposed. Between those cities was a stretch of highway longer than 350 miles. More than 5 hours of driving. A distance large enough to cross state lines. Large enough to create the illusion that a person could outrun what had happened. But a highway cannot erase a crime. It only carries it somewhere else. As Brazil allegedly drove north, the people who cared about Lanessa were still in Louisiana. Some may have been wondering why she had not answered. Some may have been waiting for a call. Some may not yet have understood that something terrible had happened. At the elementary school where Lanessa worked, her absence would eventually become noticeable. Teachers and staff work according to schedules. Children arrive expecting familiar adults to be there. A missing employee is not necessarily an emergency on the first day, but when an absence becomes unusual, concern begins to grow. A welfare check would eventually become part of the response to her disappearance. But there was a cruel delay built into the situation. By the time people began looking for Lanessa, she was already hundreds of miles away. Her body was inside a vehicle traveling toward Tennessee. And the person driving that vehicle was the man she had reportedly been trying to leave. The investigation would later have to reconstruct the hours between those points. What happened at the park? What happened immediately afterward? How was the body placed inside the car? Where did the vehicle stop? Which roads did it take? What was Brazil's destination? What was his state of mind? Were there opportunities to stop the journey? Did anyone see the vehicle? Did anyone notice the passenger? Did anyone interact with Brazil during those hours? And most importantly, what was he trying to accomplish? At the beginning of a case, investigators rarely possess the whole picture. They have fragments. A location. A missing person. A vehicle. A witness statement. A body. A suspect. A timeline that does not yet make sense. The job is to connect those fragments without allowing assumptions to replace evidence. That distinction is especially important here because the public may be tempted to look at the strange journey and immediately decide what it means. But investigators must work differently. They must ask what can be proved. They must separate what someone believes from what someone knows. They must distinguish between an allegation and a fact. And they must reconstruct the final hours of Lanessa Bradford's life with as much precision as possible. Because somewhere inside those hours may be the answer to the most important questions. Was the shooting the result of a sudden argument? Was it planned? Did the confrontation begin at the park or earlier? Did Brazil intend to leave Louisiana before the shooting? Was Memphis always the destination? Or did the destination change after Lanessa died? The answers would determine not only how investigators understood the crime, but how prosecutors could eventually present it. Yet before any courtroom, before any legal argument, there was a woman who had reportedly been trying to make a quiet escape. Her friend remembered the conversations. The money she was saving. The relatives she had contacted. The possibility of leaving behind her car. The fear that she might be found. These details matter because they show how different Lanessa's intended journey was from the one she ultimately took. She had wanted to move forward. She had wanted control over where her life was going. Instead, her final journey was controlled by someone else. And that journey would end with a police officer approaching a vehicle in Memphis. A traffic violation. A routine stop. A question. A glance toward the passenger seat. And then the discovery that would expose everything. But before Memphis, before the body was found, before the arrest, there was still Baton Rouge. There was still the park. There was still the argument. There was still the moment when an ordinary afternoon became irreversible. And there was still the woman Lanessa had been before she became the center of a homicide investigation. To understand what was lost on August 13th, we have to look more closely at her life. Not the police report. Not the allegations. Not the headlines. Lanessa herself. The person her friends knew. The person her co-workers expected to see. The woman who had reportedly been planning a future somewhere else. Because when a life is reduced to the final hours, it becomes easy to forget that the final hours were only the end. Before the road, there was a life. Before the passenger seat, there was a woman. Before the investigation, there was a marriage. And before the gunshot, there was a decision slowly taking shape inside Lanessa Bradford. She wanted to leave. She was preparing to leave. She believed, according to the person closest to her, that she needed to leave quietly. But she ran out of time. And on August 13th, the road she had planned to take toward freedom was replaced by another road entirely. A road north. A road through the darkness. A road toward Memphis. A road that carried her body farther from home while those who loved her were only beginning to realize that she was gone. That is where the silence of this case becomes impossible to ignore. Because Lanessa's final journey did not begin when the car left Baton Rouge. It began much earlier, in the private moments when she realized that staying might be more dangerous than leaving. And once that realization had taken hold, every ordinary day may have carried a question she could not escape. When will I go? How will I go? Where will I go? And can I get there safely? She never found the answer. Instead, the answer to the final question came in the most tragic way possible. No. She did not get there safely. She did not get there at all. Part 3, The Woman Behind the Headline. Before Lanessa Bradford became a name in a homicide investigation, she was simply Lanessa. A woman with a daily routine. A woman who went to work. A woman who knew people, cared about people, and, according to those who loved her, had a way of making others feel seen. That distinction matters. Because when a crime becomes a headline, the person at the center of it can disappear beneath the details of the investigation. A date replaces a lifetime. A police statement replaces a personality. A photograph becomes an image attached to a story. But Lanessa Bradford had a life long before August 13, 2026. She had mornings. She had responsibilities. She had people who expected to see her. She had conversations that had nothing to do with murder. She had plans for the future. And, in the final months of her life, she reportedly had one plan that became more important than almost anything else. She wanted to leave her marriage. Lanessa was 50 years old, an age when many people have already spent decades building a life around familiar places and familiar people. Leaving everything behind at that stage is not a simple decision. It means uncertainty. It means beginning again. It means asking questions that do not have easy answers. Where will I live? How will I support myself? Who can I trust? What will happen to the things I leave behind? What will happen when the person I am leaving realizes that I am really gone? According to her close friend Shalika Decker, Lanessa had begun working through those questions. She was reportedly saving money. Quietly. Piece by piece. She had reportedly reached out to relatives outside Baton Rouge. She was thinking about a place where she could start over. And perhaps most importantly, she was thinking about how to leave without being followed. That detail changes the emotional landscape of the entire case. This was not simply a woman saying that she was unhappy. According to Decker, Lanessa was preparing for an escape. She allegedly considered leaving behind her vehicle and belongings so that she would be harder to locate. Imagine the thoughts behind that decision. A car is normally freedom. It takes you to work. It takes you to the grocery store. It takes you to visit family. It carries your possessions. It represents independence. But if someone is afraid of being found, the same car can become a trail. A license plate can identify you. A vehicle can be recognized. A familiar route can reveal where you have gone. So Lanessa was reportedly willing to abandon things that were part of her ordinary life if doing so gave her a better chance of disappearing. That is not the behavior of someone casually considering a change. It suggests urgency. It suggests that she believed there was something she needed to escape. According to Decker, Lanessa had also described threats from Brazil. Whenever she spoke about leaving, he allegedly threatened to kill her or himself. Those words are impossible to treat as ordinary relationship arguments. A threat to kill someone changes the meaning of every future conversation about separation. The person hearing it may begin wondering whether announcing a decision is safe. Whether packing a bag is safe. Whether asking for help is safe. Whether telling a friend is safe. Whether leaving in the middle of the night is safe. And according to Decker, Lanessa had apparently reached the point where these fears were becoming part of her daily reality. There is something especially tragic about a person preparing to leave while still being physically trapped inside the life she wants to escape. The mind moves forward before the body can. Lanessa could imagine another place. She could contact relatives. She could save money. She could make plans. But until she actually left, she was still there. Still living inside the same relationship. Still sharing the same space. Still vulnerable to whatever happened next. Decker also described a change in Brazil's behavior during the final 2 or 3 months. According to her account, he had not previously been physically violent toward Lanessa, but something had changed. That period is difficult to reconstruct because the public does not have access to every private conversation between husband and wife. There may have been arguments nobody witnessed. There may have been moments Lanessa never told anyone about. There may have been fears she kept to herself. Or there may have been details that investigators will eventually uncover. For now, the most important evidence about her emotional state comes from the people who knew her and the things she reportedly told them. And one thing appears repeatedly in those accounts. She wanted out. That desire to leave became one of the final decisions Lanessa made. She was not simply waiting for the marriage to improve. She was reportedly preparing to act. But people often imagine escape as a single moment. They imagine a woman walking out the door with a suitcase. In reality, leaving a difficult relationship can be a long process. It can happen in small steps. Saving a little money. Putting important documents somewhere safe. talking to one trusted person, researching where to go, thinking about transportation, waiting for the right moment, changing plans, then waiting again. Every step carries risk, and the person planning the escape may have to behave as though nothing has changed. That means waking up, going to work, answering questions, preparing meals, having conversations, smiling when necessary, living an ordinary life while secretly preparing for a completely different one. Lanessa worked at an elementary school in Baton Rouge. That workplace provides another important contrast. Schools are places built around continuity. Children arrive expecting familiar adults. Teachers and staff have routines. The day moves according to schedules. People notice when someone is missing. Lanessa was part of that world. She had responsibilities there. She was someone whose absence could eventually be noticed. And after her death, that ordinary workplace became part of the story because people began asking why she was not there. That is one of the cruelest transitions in a disappearance. At first, people assume there is an explanation. Maybe she is sick. Maybe her phone is off. Maybe she had an emergency. Maybe she needed a day away. But when the absence continues, ordinary explanations begin to disappear. Concern replaces curiosity. Then fear. For Lanessa, that process would happen after she was already dead. She could no longer explain where she was. She could no longer call anyone. She could no longer tell her friend that the plan had changed. The people searching for her had to reconstruct her final movements without her help. And that is why the conversation she had before August 13th became so important. Her friend remembered what Lanessa had said. She remembered the plans. She remembered the fear. She remembered that Lanessa wanted to leave. Those memories would become pieces of a story that investigators would have to assemble after the fact. There is another painful possibility that cannot be ignored. Lanessa may have believed she was close to making it. Perhaps she had saved enough money. Perhaps she had decided where to go. Perhaps she had already imagined the first morning after leaving. A new place. A different routine. A phone call to family. A chance to breathe. Sometimes the future feels most real just before it is taken away. We do not know exactly what Lanessa imagined. We should not invent details that cannot be proven. But we can understand the basic human desire behind her reported plans. She wanted a life in which she could make decisions without fear. She wanted distance. She wanted another chance. And according to her friend, she was trying to make that chance possible. Then came August 13th. The day that transformed every plan she had made into evidence of a life that would never happen. Lanessa and Brazil were together at Independence Community Park. Something happened between them. An argument began. We do not know every word. We do not know every movement. We do not know exactly how the confrontation developed. But according to investigators, Brazil shot Lanessa. The woman who had reportedly spent weeks trying to leave was dead. And suddenly, the future she had been planning no longer existed. What followed is almost impossible to reconcile with the woman described by her friend. Her body was allegedly placed in the passenger seat of a vehicle. The same seat where another person might normally sit. The same place where a wife might ride beside her husband during an ordinary trip. But now there was no conversation. No argument. No destination chosen by Lanessa. Only silence. And Brazil allegedly drove north. More than 350 miles. Toward Memphis. The symbolism is devastating. Lanessa had reportedly been planning to travel away from Baton Rouge to escape her husband. After her death, she was taken away from Baton Rouge by him. The journey she had imagined as freedom became a journey she could not control. By the time the car was moving through Louisiana, the person who had been trying to escape could no longer choose where she went. And yet, even in death, Lanessa's earlier choices remained. Her friends' memories remained. Her plans remained. The money she had saved remained. The relatives she had contacted remained. The life she had been preparing to build remained in the minds of those who knew her. That is why her story should not end with the phrase, "woman found dead in car." There was a woman behind that headline. There was a worker behind that missing person concern. There was a friend behind those conversations. There was a person behind those plans. And there was a future behind every dollar she saved. Lanessa's story is also a reminder of something that is easy to forget when looking backward. People living through dangerous relationships do not always have the luxury of making dramatic exits. They may have to calculate. They may have to wait. They may have to hide their intentions. They may have to trust only one or two people. And sometimes, despite all those precautions, the moment they fear never arrives. For Lanessa, the final decision was not hers. The final journey was not hers. The final destination was not hers. But the life she had lived before that moment belonged to her. Her kindness belonged to her. Her work belonged to her. Her friendships belonged to her. Her plans belonged to her. And the courage it took to imagine leaving belonged to her as well. When the investigation began, police would have to look at a body, a vehicle, a suspect, a route, and a timeline. But before any of those things existed, there had been Lanessa Bradford. A woman who, according to someone who knew her well, had begun preparing for a new life. A woman who believed she could still change the direction of her story. A woman who reportedly understood that leaving might be dangerous, yet continued preparing to leave anyway. She did not get the chance to discover what came next. Instead, the next chapter would be written by detectives, prosecutors, witnesses, and eventually the courts. But the first chapter belongs to her. And it deserves to be remembered that way. Not as a body in a passenger seat. Not as a name attached to an arrest. Not as one more statistic in a homicide report. But as Lanessa Bradford. A 50-year-old woman who worked, cared, planned, hoped, and tried to find a way toward a different future. A future that was only days, perhaps even hours, away from becoming real. And then, on August 13th, everything changed. The woman who had been preparing to leave became the woman who could never leave. The plan disappeared. The future disappeared. But her story did not. Because now, every question surrounding the case leads back to the same place. To the life she was trying to protect. To the decision she was trying to make. And to the final day when the private fear she had reportedly carried for months became a public tragedy that would eventually stretch across more than 350 miles of highway. The road was waiting. The car was waiting. And Lanessa's final hours were about to begin. Part 4: The Incident, the day everything changed. August 13th, 2026 began like an ordinary day in Baton Rouge. There was no sign on the morning horizon announcing that a woman's life would end before the day was over. No warning that a routine Thursday would become the beginning of a homicide investigation stretching across state lines. No way for the people around Lanessa Bradford to know that the future she had been quietly preparing for would never arrive. For Lanessa, there were still the familiar rhythms of life. Work. Responsibilities. People she knew. A marriage that, according to her friend Shalika Decker, had become increasingly difficult. And somewhere in the background, the plan to leave. She had reportedly been saving money. She had reportedly contacted relatives outside Baton Rouge. She had reportedly considered leaving behind her car and belongings so that she would be more difficult to locate. The plan was quiet. The plan was private. And perhaps that was precisely what made the events of August 13th so devastating. Whatever Lanessa intended to do, she would not have the opportunity to do it. At some point that day, Lanessa and Tyrone Brazil were together at Independence Community Park in Baton Rouge. The park would later become one of the most important locations in the case. Public spaces are strange places for violence. They are designed for people to move through them without fear. Families gather. Children play. People walk, talk, exercise, and spend time outdoors. There is something inherently open about a park. Unlike a private room behind a closed door, it exists in the public world. Yet even public places can become scenes of terrible violence. The available information about what happened between Lanessa and Brazil at the park remains limited. Investigators say the two argued. The argument escalated. And then came the gunshot. According to police, Brazil shot Lanessa. The moment itself is not publicly reconstructed in enough detail to know every movement, every word, or every second. That distinction matters. A responsible account cannot fill those gaps with imagination and present the result as fact. But there is one thing that cannot be disputed. Lanessa died from a gunshot wound. The woman who had reportedly been preparing to leave her husband was suddenly gone. Her plan stopped. Her conversation stopped. Her future stopped. And whatever happened inside those final moments, there was no possibility of taking them back. For the people who would later hear the news, the first question would naturally be why. Why did the argument happen? What were they arguing about? Was Lanessa talking about leaving? Was the subject of their marriage at the center of the confrontation? Had Brazil discovered her plans? Or was the argument about something else entirely? At this stage, those questions remain part of the investigation. But the broader context makes the timing impossible to ignore. According to Decker, Lanessa had been planning to leave. According to Decker, she had described threats from Brazil when she talked about leaving. According to Decker, the relationship had reportedly become more volatile during the final months. Then, on August 13th, Lanessa was killed during an argument. The sequence is deeply disturbing. Yet the law requires more than disturbing circumstances. It requires evidence. Investigators would need to establish what happened at the park, how the shooting occurred, where the weapon came from, what happened immediately afterward, and why Brazil made the decisions he allegedly made once Lanessa was dead. The aftermath of a shooting can reveal as much about a person's intentions as the confrontation itself. Did someone call emergency services? Did someone try to save the victim? Did someone remain at the scene? Did someone run? Did someone hide evidence? Did someone attempt to construct an explanation? In this case, according to the allegations, Brazil did something very different. He did not remain at the scene. He did not, according to the publicly reported account, summon medical assistance. Instead, he allegedly placed Lanessa's body inside his vehicle. Then he drove away. That decision transformed the case. A shooting had become something much larger. The vehicle itself became a moving crime scene. The passenger seat became the place where Lanessa's body would remain for hours. And the road became part of the investigation. There is something almost unreal about imagining what happened next. The car pulls away from Baton Rouge. The city begins to recede. Traffic continues. Other drivers pass. People go about their day. At intersections, vehicles stop and start. At gas stations, people walk in and out. At restaurants, families sit down to eat. At roadside businesses, workers continue their shifts. And somewhere among all of those ordinary movements, Brazil was allegedly driving with his dead wife beside him. More than 350 miles lay ahead. The journey would eventually lead toward Memphis, Tennessee. Why Memphis? That remains one of the central questions. A person trying to flee a crime might choose a destination because of family, money, shelter, familiarity, or the possibility of disappearing. A person in shock might simply drive without thinking clearly. A person attempting to conceal a crime might have a specific plan. Without evidence, it is impossible to know which explanation applies here. But the fact remains that Brazil allegedly chose to leave Louisiana. And every mile carried the vehicle farther from the original scene. The road also created a strange psychological distance. At the park, the crime had happened. Inside the vehicle, it was still present. But outside the windows, life continued. That contrast is one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. The world does not stop when a murder happens. Traffic lights continue changing. People continue going to work. Phones continue ringing. Children continue playing. The sun continues moving across the sky. And yet, for the victim's family, the world has changed forever. At some point, someone would begin wondering where Lanessa was. Her absence would become significant because she had responsibilities at an elementary school. A person who normally appears at work and suddenly does not is noticed. At first, there may be an innocent explanation. Perhaps she was sick. Perhaps she had a family emergency. Perhaps she simply needed time away. But as the hours passed, concern would grow. The people who knew Lanessa did not know that she was already dead. They did not know that her body was hundreds of miles away. They did not know that her final journey was already underway. And they certainly could not have imagined the way police would eventually find her. Back on the road, the vehicle continued north. The journey from Baton Rouge toward Memphis is long enough to create a strange sense of time. More than 5 hours can pass quickly during an ordinary road trip. People listen to music. They stop for food. They make phone calls. They watch the landscape change. But in this case, the journey carried a completely different weight. The passenger seat was occupied by a dead woman. The driver was the man accused of killing her. And every minute that passed increased the distance between Lanessa and the place where her life had ended. There is no reliable public account describing every stop Brazil made. There is no complete record of every thought that passed through his mind. There is no confirmed explanation for why he continued driving. That uncertainty is important. True crime stories often create the temptation to explain everything. A mysterious action is immediately assigned a motive. A strange decision becomes proof of a particular psychological state. A long drive becomes evidence of a carefully designed plan. But real investigations are rarely that simple. People can act irrationally after violent events. They can panic. They can make contradictory decisions. They can attempt to escape. They can try to hide evidence. They can behave in ways that only make sense once the full evidence is known. That is why investigators would need to reconstruct the journey rather than assume its meaning. The route. The timing. The vehicle. The stops. The communications. The evidence inside the car. The circumstances of the shooting. The relationship between Lanessa and Brazil. All of these pieces could help answer the question of what happened after the gunshot. But while investigators would later examine those details, Lanessa's family was facing something much more immediate. Uncertainty. When someone disappears, the first hours can be unbearable because the mind keeps producing explanations. Maybe she will call. Maybe she is somewhere safe. Maybe there has been a misunderstanding. Maybe her phone is dead. Maybe she needs help. Every possibility remains open. Until it doesn't. A welfare check would eventually become part of the response to Lanessa's absence. Someone would need to determine whether she was safe. But by then, the truth was already far away. The house could not provide the answer. Her workplace could not provide the answer. Her phone could not provide the answer. The answer was moving north. It was inside a vehicle heading toward Tennessee. And the man driving it was allegedly carrying the person everyone was trying to find. This is where the case begins to feel like two stories happening simultaneously. In Louisiana, people were beginning to search for Lanessa. On the highway, Brazil was allegedly transporting her body away from Louisiana. Two timelines were moving toward the same destination. One was the timeline of discovery. The other was the timeline of escape. Neither side knew how close they were to the same moment. The journey would eventually reach Memphis. But before that happened, there were hundreds of miles of road. Hundreds of miles in which the car could have remained unnoticed. Hundreds of miles in which the secret could have remained hidden. And yet, eventually, the journey ended in the most ordinary way imaginable. A traffic stop. Not a dramatic police pursuit. Not a tactical operation. Not a manhunt involving helicopters and barricades. A traffic violation. That detail is almost impossible to ignore. The investigation would not close in on Brazil because detectives had tracked him down through some elaborate operation. It would happen because an officer stopped the vehicle. A routine interaction became the doorway to a homicide investigation. But before Memphis, the most important event had already happened. Lanessa was dead. And the final moments of her life were now behind the locked doors of an investigation. The park had become the beginning. The car had become the bridge. The highway had become the distance. Memphis would become the discovery. And Lanessa's family would soon have to confront the terrible truth that the woman they were looking for was never coming home. Still, one question remained above all others. What happened during the argument? That question may never be fully answered by a single witness. Perhaps the truth will come from forensic evidence. Perhaps from statements. Perhaps from digital records. Perhaps from the weapon. Perhaps from the vehicle. Perhaps from something Brazil himself says. But whatever the answer, the final outcome was already irreversible. A life had been lost. A family had been changed. A woman who had reportedly been planning a new beginning had been denied the chance to see it. And a husband was now driving away from the place where she died. There is a terrible irony in that movement. Lanessa had reportedly wanted to travel away from Baton Rouge because she believed she needed to escape. She had reportedly imagined a future beyond the relationship. She had reportedly prepared herself to leave. But the only journey she would make out of Baton Rouge was one she never chose. The road carried her body north. Her future remained behind. Her friends remained behind. Her workplace remained behind. The life she had built remained behind. And somewhere ahead, beyond the Louisiana border, a traffic officer would eventually bring the vehicle to a stop. At that moment, the mystery would become visible. But for now, the car kept moving. The highway stretched ahead. The passenger seat remained occupied. And the last hours of Lanessa Bradford's life were being transformed into the first hours of a criminal investigation. The shooting had happened. The body had been moved. The vehicle had left Baton Rouge. And the distance was growing. But no matter how far the car traveled, it could not change what had happened. It could only carry the evidence somewhere else. Somewhere investigators would eventually find it. Somewhere the journey would end. Somewhere a routine traffic stop would reveal a secret that had traveled more than 350 miles. And somewhere along that road, the private tragedy of Lanessa Bradford became a crime that could no longer be hidden. Part 5 of The Discovery. The body in the passenger seat. There are moments in a criminal investigation when everything changes in a matter of seconds. A routine traffic stop. A driver's license. A question asked through an open window. A police officer leaning toward the vehicle. And then, something that does not belong. Something that transforms an ordinary roadside encounter into a homicide investigation. For Lanessa Bradford, that moment came hundreds of miles from the place where investigators believed her life had ended. Baton Rouge was behind them. Louisiana was behind them. And somewhere along the highway, the normal rhythm of the road had continued without anyone knowing what was happening inside that vehicle. Cars passed. Trucks moved in the opposite direction. Gas stations opened and closed. Road signs appeared and disappeared. The landscape changed. But inside Brazil's vehicle, there was a silence that no passing driver could see. Lanessa Bradford was sitting in the passenger seat. She was dead. And according to investigators, the man behind the wheel was the person responsible for her death. The journey had lasted for hours. Then, in Memphis, Tennessee, everything stopped. The evening of August 13, 2026, began like countless other evenings in Memphis. Traffic moved through the city. People were finishing work. Drivers were heading home. Streetlights were coming on as daylight faded. For most people on the road that night, the world was still ordinary. They had no reason to look twice at the vehicles around them. No reason to wonder who was sitting in the passenger seats. No reason to imagine that one of those cars might contain the answer to a missing person investigation that had begun in another state. Then officers stopped Brazil's vehicle. The reason, according to reports, was a traffic violation. At first, there was nothing about the encounter that suggested the discovery that was about to unfold. Traffic stops are among the most routine interactions between police officers and drivers. An officer approaches. The driver provides identification. Questions are asked. Documents are checked. Sometimes a warning is issued. Sometimes a citation. And then the driver leaves. But this stop did not end that way. Because when officers looked inside the vehicle, they saw a woman who was not moving. At first glance, there may have been uncertainty. Was she sleeping? Was she unconscious? Was there a medical emergency? Then the reality became impossible to ignore. The woman in the passenger seat was dead. Her name was Lanessa Bradford. And suddenly, the traffic stop became a crime scene. Imagine the scene from the perspective of the officers. A vehicle stopped on the roadside. The engine still capable of carrying the occupant somewhere else. A man behind the steering wheel. And beside him, the body of a woman. There was no need for a dramatic chase. No barricade. No gunfire between officers and a fleeing suspect. No massive search through forests or abandoned buildings. The discovery was almost painfully simple. The body was right there. Visible inside the vehicle. The mystery of where Bradford had gone was beginning to unravel. But another mystery was taking its place. Why was her body in Memphis? Why had Brazil driven all the way from Baton Rouge? And why had he continued driving for more than 5 hours instead of stopping to call for help? Those questions would become central to the investigation. Bradford's death was not simply a question of where her body was found. Investigators had to reconstruct what happened before the car ever reached Tennessee. That meant going backward. Away from Memphis. Back through Mississippi and Louisiana. Back along the highway. Back toward Baton Rouge. Back toward Independence Community Park. And ultimately, back toward the relationship between Lanessa Bradford and Brazil. Because the body in Memphis was only the final piece of a much larger story. The beginning of that story appeared to involve a marriage that Bradford had reportedly been trying to escape. According to her close friend Shalika Decker, Bradford had been saving money. She had contacted relatives outside the city. She had reportedly been thinking about leaving quietly. Not announcing it. Not creating a confrontation. Simply disappearing. The plan, according to Decker, was to get away before Brazil could stop her. There was something deeply revealing about that alleged plan. Bradford was not simply talking about leaving. She was preparing. She was putting aside money. She was contacting people who could help her. She was reportedly considering abandoning familiar possessions, perhaps even leaving her vehicle behind. A person does not normally make plans like that because they expect tomorrow to be exactly like today. It suggested fear. It suggested urgency. And according to Decker, Bradford had a reason to be afraid. Bradford had reportedly told her friend that when she talked about leaving Brazil, he threatened to kill her or kill himself. Those allegations are important, but they must remain what they are, statements attributed to Bradford through her friend, rather than findings that had been established by a court. That distinction matters. In true crime storytelling, the temptation is always to look backward from the ending. Once we know a person has been murdered, every earlier argument can appear like a warning. Every strange conversation can appear like a prediction. Every unanswered message can suddenly seem ominous. But real life is rarely that clear. People live through complicated relationships. They argue. They reconcile. They make plans. They change their minds. They stay when they intended to leave. They leave when everyone expected them to stay. And sometimes, people recognize danger before anyone around them understands how serious it has become. Bradford may have been one of those people. According to Decker, she was preparing to leave. She never got the chance. At some point on August 13th, Bradford and Brazil were together at Independence Community Park in Baton Rouge. The park itself would become an important location in the reconstruction of the case. But there is something unsettling about the ordinary nature of such a place. Parks are designed for life. Children play there. Families gather. People walk. Joggers pass beneath trees. Birds move through the branches. The sounds of traffic mix with conversations and footsteps. It is a place associated with everyday routines. And yet investigators say that somewhere within that ordinary environment, an argument between a husband and wife escalated into deadly violence. What began as words allegedly became a confrontation. And then, according to police, Brazil shot Bradford. One moment she was alive. The next, she had suffered a fatal gunshot wound. There would be no journey home for her. No final phone call. No chance to tell her family what had happened. No opportunity to complete the escape plan she had reportedly been preparing. Instead, her body was placed inside the vehicle. And the vehicle began moving. That decision is one of the most disturbing elements of the entire case. Brazil did not, according to investigators, remain at the location and summon emergency services. He did not immediately report the shooting. Instead, he allegedly placed Bradford in the passenger seat and drove away. The direction was west and north. Away from Baton Rouge. Toward Memphis. More than 350 miles separated the two cities by road, according to reports. The distance matters because it transforms the aftermath from a moment of panic into an extended period of time. 5 hours is a long time. 5 hours gives a person countless opportunities to stop. To turn around. To call someone. To contact authorities. To ask for medical assistance. To abandon the vehicle. To make a different decision. But according to the available reports, the journey continued. Mile after mile. Exit after exit. The car kept moving. During that journey, the outside world remained unaware. Drivers may have seen the vehicle. A truck driver may have passed it on the highway. Someone may have stopped at the same gas station. Another motorist may have been traveling only a few car lengths away. But none of them knew what was inside. From the outside, it could have looked like an ordinary vehicle carrying a man and a woman. There is something haunting about that contrast. The road does not know what happened inside a car. The highway has no memory. It simply carries vehicles forward. A vehicle can contain groceries. A suitcase. A sleeping child. A family returning from vacation. Or, as investigators allege in this case, the body of a woman whose family was already beginning to wonder where she was. Back in Baton Rouge, Bradford's absence was becoming increasingly significant. She worked at an elementary school. Her disappearance was not necessarily the kind of absence that could be ignored indefinitely. People who know someone's routine notice when that routine changes. A person who normally arrives at work suddenly does not appear. A phone goes unanswered. A familiar face is missing from a place where it is expected. At first, there may be innocent explanations. Perhaps someone is sick. Perhaps there is a family emergency. Perhaps a phone has been lost. Perhaps someone simply needs a day away. But as time passes, uncertainty becomes concern. And concern can become fear. A welfare check was requested. The purpose of a welfare check is simple. Police go to a person's home and attempt to determine whether that person is safe. Sometimes they find nothing unusual. Sometimes they discover that the person is fine. And sometimes the answer is much worse. In Bradford's case, the check could not immediately produce her. She was not where people expected her to be. Because while authorities in Baton Rouge were trying to determine her whereabouts, the vehicle carrying her body was already hundreds of miles away. The distance between Baton Rouge and Memphis created a cruel illusion. Bradford's loved ones were looking in one direction. The vehicle was traveling in another. The search was beginning at home. The answer was moving farther away. That is one of the most difficult elements in missing person investigations. The family often imagines the person somewhere nearby. A familiar neighborhood. A friend's house. A hospital. A roadside. Investigators must consider every possibility. But sometimes, the person is already far beyond the area where anyone thinks to look. In this case, the truth was traveling down the highway. And nobody in Baton Rouge yet knew exactly where it was going. Then came Memphis. The traffic stop. The vehicle. The passenger seat. The body. In a matter of moments, the geographical mystery was solved. But the investigative mystery had only begun. Officers now had a deceased woman. They had a driver connected to her. They had a vehicle that had traveled across state lines. And they had an alleged homicide that began in Louisiana and ended in Tennessee. That immediately introduced multiple jurisdictions. The case would involve Memphis authorities, Louisiana investigators, the process of returning Brazil to Louisiana, and the reconstruction of events that had occurred hundreds of miles away. But before any courtroom could examine the evidence, investigators first had to understand the scene in front of them. They had to establish identity. They had to document the body. They had to determine the cause of death. They had to secure the vehicle. They had to preserve potential evidence. And above all, they had to answer the most basic question in any homicide investigation. What happened? A body found inside a vehicle can contain a story. Not a story told in words. A story told through physical evidence. The position of the body. The location of injuries. The condition of clothing. The condition of the vehicle. The presence or absence of blood. Possible fingerprints. Possible DNA. Possible firearm evidence. Digital records. Phone activity. Travel routes. Fuel purchases. Surveillance cameras. Every detail can become another piece of the timeline. And the timeline was critical. Because Brazil's journey provided investigators with something that many homicide cases do not have. A long sequence of movements. The vehicle had traveled. That movement potentially created records. Traffic cameras may have captured portions of the journey. Gas stations may have surveillance footage. Electronic transactions can sometimes establish locations. Cell phone records can place devices within geographic areas. Vehicle data may reveal movement. None of those things automatically proves what happened. But together, they can help investigators reconstruct a person's path. The road that Brazil allegedly traveled could become a map of the hours following Bradford's death. The discovery in Memphis also created a crucial problem for Brazil. The alleged crime was no longer hidden. The body had been found. The victim had been identified. The vehicle had been stopped. And the driver was in police custody. Whatever explanation Brazil might eventually provide would have to be examined against the physical evidence, against the timeline, against witness statements, against travel records, against the circumstances surrounding Bradford's death, and against the question that would echo throughout the investigation. Why? Why would someone drive more than 350 miles with the body of his wife beside him? Why Memphis? Why leave Baton Rouge? Why not seek help? Why continue driving? Was there a destination beyond Memphis? Was the journey planned? Or was it an impulsive attempt to escape the consequences of what had happened? At this stage, those questions remained unanswered. And investigators could not afford to fill those gaps with assumptions. There is another reason the passenger seat matters. It was not simply where Bradford was found. It was where she had remained during the final part of her journey. She had not chosen that journey. She had not chosen Memphis. She had not chosen to leave Louisiana that night. According to investigators, the journey happened after she had already been fatally wounded. And that means the final miles of Bradford's life were no longer about where she wanted to go. They were about where someone else decided to take her. That distinction is painful. Because before the shooting, according to her friend, Bradford had reportedly been planning a journey of her own. She had wanted to leave. She had been saving money. She had been preparing for a new beginning. Her intended destination was connected to freedom. The journey that actually happened was connected to death. Two journeys. Two completely different meanings. And only one of them ever took place. For investigators, the discovery in Memphis would therefore become more than a shocking moment. It was a doorway into the final hours of Lanessa Bradford's life. The next task was to reconstruct those hours. Where was she before Independence Community Park? Who spoke with her? Who saw her? What did she say? What happened during the argument? Was anyone else nearby? Were there witnesses? What weapon was allegedly used? Where did the shooting occur? And after the shooting, what exactly happened inside the vehicle? The answers would determine whether the case could move from suspicion to evidence. And evidence would determine what could ultimately be presented in court. For Bradford's family, however, the discovery meant something much more personal. They no longer had to wonder where she was. But certainty is not always relief. Sometimes the answer is worse than the question. A missing person can still come home. A missing person can still call. A missing person can still walk through the front door. Death removes all of those possibilities. And the family was now left with the reality that the woman they loved would not return. The woman who had reportedly been preparing to leave. The woman who worked at an elementary school. The woman her friends described as kind and encouraging. The woman who had apparently been trying to build a path toward another life. She was gone. And the man she had allegedly been trying to leave was now in custody. The case had crossed state lines. But its emotional center remained in Baton Rouge. That was where Bradford's life had been. That was where her work was. That was where her relationships existed. That was where, according to her friend, she had begun quietly preparing for a future without Brazil. And that was where investigators would have to return. Because Memphis had provided the discovery. Louisiana would provide the beginning. The passenger seat had revealed the victim. The road would reveal the journey. But somewhere behind the journey was the moment when everything changed. The argument. The gunshot. The silence afterward. And the decision to drive. By the time the police lights illuminated Brazil's vehicle in Memphis, Lanessa Bradford's reported plan to disappear had been replaced by something no one close to her could have imagined. She had wanted to leave quietly. Instead, her death had forced the truth into the open. Not through a carefully planned investigation. Not through a confession. Not through a dramatic manhunt. But because a police officer stopped a car for a traffic violation. A routine stop. An ordinary road. An extraordinary discovery. And inside that vehicle, in the passenger seat, was the answer to the question people in Baton Rouge had been asking. Where is Lanessa Bradford? She was there. Hundreds of miles from home. Silent. Motionless. And at the center of a homicide investigation that was only beginning to reveal how much had happened before the car ever reached Memphis. The road had ended. But the investigation had not. It was time to go back to Baton Rouge. Back to Independence Community Park. Back to the beginning of the final argument. And back to the first pieces of evidence that could tell investigators whether Lanessa Bradford's death had been the sudden explosion of a confrontation or the final act in a relationship that had been deteriorating for months. Part 6: The Investigation. Suspects, questions, and dead ends. The discovery of Lanessa Bradford's body in Memphis changed the case completely. Until that moment, investigators in Baton Rouge were dealing with an absence. A woman had not appeared at work. A welfare check had been requested. People were trying to determine where she was. There was uncertainty. There were questions. There was still the possibility that something had happened to her without anyone knowing exactly what. Then Memphis police stopped a vehicle. And uncertainty became evidence. Lanessa Bradford was dead. Her husband, Brazil, was behind the wheel. And the vehicle had traveled hundreds of miles from Baton Rouge. For investigators, the question was no longer simply, where is Lanessa Bradford? It became, what happened to Lanessa Bradford, and why did her husband drive her body across state lines? That question would lead investigators backward through time, retracing a chain of events that began long before the traffic stop. The first task in any homicide investigation is to separate what is known from what is merely believed. That distinction becomes even more important when a case involves a relationship. Friends have opinions. Family members have memories. Neighbors remember arguments. People may say they notice changes. Some may insist that the relationship had been troubled for months. Others may say they never saw anything unusual. Every statement has to be examined. Every detail has to be placed on a timeline. And every allegation has to be compared with physical evidence. In Bradford's case, one of the most important accounts came from her close friend, Shalika Decker. According to Decker, Bradford had been preparing to leave Brazil. Not someday. Not simply as an expression of frustration. She was reportedly saving money. She had contacted relatives outside Baton Rouge. She was allegedly preparing to disappear quietly. And according to Decker, Bradford had told her that Brazil had threatened to kill her or himself if she left. Those statements immediately became relevant to investigators. Because if Bradford had truly been planning to leave, that could provide important context for the events leading up to her death. But context is not proof. Investigators still needed to determine what could be independently verified. One of the most difficult things about reconstructing a domestic homicide is that the most important conversations often happen behind closed doors. There may be no camera, no recording, no witness, no written transcript. Just two people. A husband. A wife. Words exchanged in private. Threats that may never have been documented. Arguments that may have ended before anyone else knew they had happened. And when one person dies, the surviving person can become the only direct source of information about what occurred. That is why investigators look beyond statements. They look for patterns. Messages. Phone calls. Financial transactions. Travel records. Prior reports. Witnesses. Physical evidence. Anything capable of confirming or contradicting what people say. In Bradford's case, the reported plan to leave would therefore become one part of a larger puzzle. The investigators also had a crucial physical fact. Bradford had died from a gunshot wound. That meant the weapon became central to the investigation. Where was the firearm? Who owned it? Who had access to it? Where was it fired? Had it been legally purchased? Were there fingerprints? Was ammunition recovered? Could ballistic evidence connect the weapon to the fatal wound? Was the shooting location consistent with the account investigators were developing? A gun can become a silent witness. It does not explain why a person pulled the trigger, but it can sometimes help establish whether a particular weapon was used. And the location where a firearm was discharged can create another layer of evidence. Investigators would have to examine the circumstances surrounding the alleged shooting at Independence Community Park. The park was important because it represented the beginning of the final sequence. Somewhere there, according to police, Bradford and Brazil argued. At some point, the confrontation escalated. And then a gun was fired. But what exactly happened between those moments? That is where criminal investigations become complicated. A single sentence, "They argued and he shot her," can hide dozens of unanswered questions. Who initiated the confrontation? What were they arguing about? Was Bradford attempting to leave? Was Brazil angry about the relationship? Did the argument continue for minutes or longer? Was there a physical struggle? Was the shooting intentional? Was there an allegation of self-defense? Was there another person nearby? Did anyone hear the gunshot? Did anyone see the couple? Did surveillance cameras cover any portion of the area? What happened immediately afterward? And most importantly, what did Brazil do once Bradford was no longer alive? The decision to leave Baton Rouge became particularly significant. If the shooting had been an accident, investigators would want to know why Brazil did not report it. If it had been an act of self-defense, investigators would want to know why he did not contact police. If it had been intentional, investigators would want to understand what happened afterward. Different explanations produce different expected behavior. That is why investigators cannot simply ask what a person says happened. They ask whether the person's behavior is consistent with that explanation. Brazil's alleged decision to place Bradford in the passenger seat and drive away therefore became one of the most important behavioral facts in the case. He did not remain at the scene. He left Louisiana. And he continued driving until Memphis police intervened. The distance between Baton Rouge and Memphis also gave investigators something else. Time. Time for decisions. Time for evidence to be created. Time for electronic records to accumulate. Time for the suspect to potentially contact other people. Time for cameras to capture the vehicle. Time for the story to change. And time for investigators to reconstruct the route. More than 350 miles is not a short trip. It is a sustained movement. The vehicle had to pass through different areas. It had to stop or slow down. Fuel may have been purchased. Phones may have connected to different cell towers. Navigation systems may have recorded destinations. Cameras may have captured license plates. Credit cards may have been used. Every mile could potentially create another timestamp. And timestamps are powerful in homicide investigations. They turn an uncertain story into a sequence. Imagine investigators building the timeline. August 13th. Baton Rouge. Bradford and Brazil together. Argument. Alleged shooting. Bradford dies. Vehicle leaves. The road north. Crossing state lines. Hours pass. Then Memphis. Traffic stop. Discovery. Arrest. Each point has to be connected. If one timestamp says Brazil was in one location at a particular time, investigators can compare that with another record. If a surveillance camera captures the vehicle, investigators can establish movement. If a phone call occurred, they can identify the time. If a fuel transaction appears on a bank statement, it can potentially establish another location. The goal is to turn a journey into evidence. But investigations are rarely straightforward. There are always dead ends. A witness remembers something incorrectly. A camera does not capture the license plate. A phone is turned off. A surveillance recording is overwritten. A statement changes. A theory appears convincing and then collapses when confronted with physical evidence. The public often imagines criminal investigations as a straight line. Crime. Clue. Suspect. Arrest. Justice. Reality is much messier. Investigators move forward, then backward. They test one theory, reject another, return to an earlier detail, ask the same question from a different angle. And sometimes, the smallest detail becomes the most important. For Bradford's case, the relationship itself became part of the investigation. According to Decker, Bradford had told her that Brazil had threatened to kill her or himself if she left. That allegation could potentially help investigators understand the emotional context. But investigators would need to establish whether there were previous incidents. Had Bradford ever reported threats? Had anyone else heard them? Were there text messages? Were there recordings? Did family members know about the alleged threats? Had anyone noticed changes in Bradford's behavior? Had she made preparations that could be documented? Her reported savings and communications with relatives could potentially become evidence of her intentions. A bank transaction might show money being set aside. A message could show plans to travel. A phone call could establish contact with relatives. None of these details alone would explain the shooting. But together, they could help reconstruct the period immediately before her death. The question of previous violence was equally important. Decker reportedly said that Brazil had not previously hit Bradford, but that the situation had changed during the 2 or 3 months before the killing. Again, that is an allegation from a friend, not a court finding. But from an investigative perspective, such a statement could prompt questions. What changed during those months? Did arguments become more frequent? Did Bradford become more withdrawn? Did she begin avoiding certain situations? Did she tell other people she was afraid? Did anyone observe injuries? Did she change her routine? Did she begin saving money because she was planning to leave? Sometimes the signs of a deteriorating relationship are invisible to outsiders. Sometimes they are obvious. And sometimes they only become meaningful after tragedy. There is also the possibility that Bradford's planned departure was itself a source of conflict. If she had decided to leave, the investigators would want to know when Brazil became aware of that decision. Did he know she was preparing? Did he know she had contacted relatives? Did he know she was saving money? Did he know she was considering abandoning her vehicle? And if he knew, how did he react? These questions do not prove motive. But motive often exists within relationships. It can develop from jealousy, control, financial conflict, separation, fear of abandonment, anger, or a combination of factors. Yet investigators must resist the temptation to select the most emotionally satisfying explanation too early. A theory must survive evidence. Then there was Memphis. Why Memphis? That question would remain particularly important. If Brazil was attempting to flee, was Memphis simply the destination he chose? Was he traveling toward someone he knew? Was he trying to reach another location? Was he planning to abandon the vehicle? Was he trying to dispose of the body somewhere along the route? Or did he simply drive without a clear plan? At the time of the initial investigation, there was not enough publicly established information to answer those questions conclusively. And this is where responsible true crime storytelling matters. It is tempting to create a motive where there is none yet established. It is tempting to say, he drove to Memphis because he wanted to. But unless investigators have established that fact, it remains speculation. The honest question is, what was he planning to do? And the honest answer, at this stage, is investigators had to determine that the traffic stop itself was therefore an accidental turning point. Had police not stopped the vehicle, the story might have continued. Brazil could have driven farther. The body could have been moved. Evidence could have been lost. The investigation could have become more complicated. But the traffic stop interrupted the journey. The road ended. The investigation began. That is one of the strange realities of criminal cases. Sometimes the decisive moment is not the result of sophisticated detective work. Sometimes it begins with something completely ordinary. A broken taillight. A speeding violation. A registration problem. A traffic stop. And in this case, according to reports, a police officer looking into the passenger compartment. Once the body was discovered, Brazil was arrested in Memphis as a fugitive from another jurisdiction. That status is important. An arrest is not a conviction. A person can be arrested because authorities believe there is probable cause or because another jurisdiction is seeking the person. The legal process then determines what charges can be pursued and whether the evidence is sufficient. Brazil would face extradition proceedings and be returned to Louisiana. There, the homicide investigation would continue. The case would no longer be confined to a traffic stop in Tennessee. It would become a Louisiana murder case. And that meant investigators now had to prepare for a different kind of battle. Not the battle to locate Bradford. She had been found. Not the battle to locate Brazil. He had been arrested. The next battle was the battle of proof. Could investigators establish exactly what happened? Could they establish where Bradford was killed? Could they connect the firearm to Brazil? Could they establish intent? Could they demonstrate what happened after the shooting? Could they establish that the journey to Memphis was part of an attempt to flee or conceal the crime? Could they corroborate Bradford's reported plans to leave? Could they establish a motive? And could all of this evidence survive the scrutiny of a courtroom? For the investigators, one of the most powerful pieces of information may have been the simplest. Brazil was found with Bradford. There was no question about whether they had been together that night. There was no need to discover a hidden relationship. They were married. Their presence together was not suspicious by itself. The suspicious element was what investigators found inside the vehicle. The victim was dead. The driver was alive. The vehicle had traveled from the location where the shooting allegedly occurred toward another state. That created an immediate connection. But connection is not the same as proof. Investigators still had to establish the sequence. A homicide investigation can be imagined as a series of concentric circles. At the center is the victim. Around her is the immediate scene. Around that is the suspect. Around the suspect is the relationship. And around the relationship is the wider environment, the friends, relatives, workplace, digital communications, financial records, travel routes, and witnesses. The closer investigators move toward the center, the more physical the evidence becomes. The farther they move outward, the more they depend on testimony and records. Bradford's case required both. The physical evidence could help establish how she died. The people who knew her could help explain what her life had been like beforehand. Neither piece alone could tell the entire story. Her workplace was another important part of that wider circle. Bradford worked at an elementary school. People who saw her regularly may have noticed changes. Perhaps she seemed anxious. Perhaps she appeared completely normal. Perhaps she talked about leaving. Perhaps she never mentioned her marriage at all. Investigators would need to determine what co-workers knew. Because sometimes the person who provides the most important clue is not a family member. It can be a co-worker who remembers a sentence spoken casually in a hallway. A friend who received a late-night message. A relative who knew she was planning to travel. A person who noticed that she had started collecting money. Every fragment can become part of the timeline. And then there was the reported plan to disappear. It is one of the most tragic details in the case. Bradford had allegedly been planning to leave without being followed. She reportedly understood that she might need to abandon familiar things. Her vehicle. Her belongings. Perhaps even her routine. She had reportedly contacted relatives outside Baton Rouge. She was building an exit. But the plan required time. It required secrecy. And most importantly, it required survival. She had to make it to the moment when she could walk away. She never did. This is where the investigation becomes more than a sequence of police procedures. It becomes an attempt to reconstruct a life that was interrupted. Lanessa Bradford was not simply a name in a case file. She had a workplace. Friends. Family. People who expected to see her again. People who had conversations with her. People who knew the sound of her voice. People who may have believed that her plan to leave would eventually succeed. Then, instead of a new beginning, they received news that she was dead. And investigators had to reconstruct the final days of her life through fragments. The phrase dead end can be misleading. In an investigation, a dead end is rarely a complete absence of information. It is often a clue that does not lead where investigators expected. A witness remembers something that proves irrelevant. A theory fails. A potential motive cannot be supported. A piece of evidence answers one question while creating three more. For Brazil, the central unanswered question remained the purpose of the journey. Why Memphis? The answer could potentially change how investigators understood the aftermath of the shooting. If the destination had been planned, it might suggest preparation. If the destination was random, it might suggest panic. If the vehicle was headed toward someone known to Brazil, that could open another line of investigation. If he intended to dispose of the body, investigators would look for evidence of that plan. And if he simply kept driving because he did not know what else to do, that would create a very different psychological picture. But without evidence, all of these possibilities remained possibilities. The most important breakthrough would therefore have to come from something investigators could verify. A witness. A camera. A firearm. A message. A location. A confession. A contradiction. Something capable of turning a question into an answer. The case had reached the dangerous middle stage of an investigation. The suspect was in custody. The victim had been identified. But the complete story was still incomplete. There were gaps between the beginning and the end. And those gaps were exactly where investigators needed to look. Because every homicide leaves behind a timeline. Even when the killer tries to escape. Even when the victim cannot speak. Even when there are no eyewitnesses. Time leaves traces. Phones record time. Cameras record time. Transactions record time. Vehicles record movement. People remember when they saw someone. And physical evidence can sometimes reveal how much time passed between events. Brazil's journey to Memphis was therefore not simply an escape route. It was potentially an evidence trail. Every mile he traveled could help investigators understand what happened after Bradford's death. And every decision he made during those hours could become evidence of his state of mind. But there was one fact that could not be changed. The woman in the passenger seat was Lanessa Bradford. She had reportedly spent the weeks before her death preparing to leave her husband. She had allegedly told a friend about threats. She had reportedly saved money. She had contacted relatives. She had imagined a future somewhere beyond Baton Rouge. Instead, her final destination was determined by someone else. A park. A vehicle. A highway. Memphis. And finally, a police station. The investigation was now moving toward its most important phase. The authorities had a suspect. They had a victim. They had a vehicle. They had a route. They had a reported shooting. But they still needed the one thing every prosecution ultimately depends upon: a coherent, evidence-supported story. Not a story built from rumor. Not a story built from assumptions. Not a story built solely from the tragedy of the outcome. A story that could withstand questioning. A story that could withstand defense attorneys. A story that could withstand a courtroom. And somewhere within the evidence was the answer to one crucial question. What happened in the moments between the argument at Independence Community Park and the moment Brazil began driving north? That was the missing bridge. And investigators were about to find the first pieces of it. The traffic stop in Memphis had cracked the case open. Now, they had to follow the evidence backward. Back to Baton Rouge. Back to the park. Back to Bradford's final hours. And eventually, toward the moment when one woman's plan to escape her marriage collided with a gunshot that ended her life. The next stage would not be about finding the suspect. He had already been found. It would be about finding the truth. Part 7, The Breakthrough. Reconstructing the final hours. The case had begun with a missing woman. Then came a body. Then a traffic stop. Then an arrest. But none of those events, by themselves, could explain what had happened to Lanessa Bradford. The discovery in Memphis had answered the question of where she was. It had not yet answered why she was there. And more importantly, it had not fully answered the question that investigators needed to prove. What happened between Lanessa Bradford and Brazil before the car left Baton Rouge? That was the point where the investigation had to turn backward. Away from Memphis. Away from the traffic stop. Away from the long highway. Back toward Louisiana. Back toward Independence Community Park. Back toward the final hours of Lanessa Bradford's life. Because somewhere in those hours was the sequence that could transform a shocking discovery into a prosecutable homicide case. The first breakthrough was not necessarily one dramatic piece of evidence. It was the convergence of several facts. Bradford was dead from a gunshot wound. Brazil had been found transporting her body. The vehicle had traveled from Louisiana to Tennessee. And, according to people close to Bradford, she had reportedly been preparing to leave her husband. Each fact carried different weight. The physical evidence established death. The vehicle established movement. The arrest established that Brazil had been with Bradford after the shooting. The statements from people who knew Bradford potentially established a pattern in the relationship. The challenge was connecting them. Investigators had to determine whether these were isolated facts or pieces of one continuous story. The reported statements from Shalika Decker became particularly important. According to Decker, Bradford had been saving money. She had been contacting relatives outside Baton Rouge. She had reportedly been preparing to leave quietly. And she had allegedly told Decker that Brazil had threatened to kill her or himself if she left. Those words take on a different weight when viewed after Bradford's death. Before the homicide, they could have sounded like a warning from someone caught in a troubled relationship. After the homicide, investigators had to ask whether those statements provided evidence of escalating danger. But again, investigators could not simply assume that every statement was accurate. They had to establish when Bradford made those comments. What exactly did she say? How often did she say it? Who else knew? Did any messages exist? Did anyone else receive similar disclosures? Was there evidence that Bradford had actually been preparing to leave? The more independently verifiable details they could find, the stronger the timeline would become. There is a particular tragedy in the idea of someone quietly preparing to leave. Leaving a marriage can involve dozens of small decisions. Money is set aside. Documents are gathered. A phone number is saved. A relative is contacted. A destination is considered. A bag is packed. Sometimes nothing dramatic happens. There is no final announcement. No farewell. No confrontation. Just preparation. Bradford was reportedly doing some of those things. And if that account was accurate, she may have believed she still had time. Time to save more money. Time to contact family. Time to choose the right moment. Time to disappear. But the timeline of August 13th would not allow her that time. Investigators also had to examine the reported change in the relationship. Decker reportedly said that Brazil had not previously been physically violent toward Bradford, but that things had changed during the 2 or 3 months before the killing. That period was potentially significant. 2 or 3 months is long enough for patterns to emerge. Arguments can become more frequent. Tension can increase. A person can begin changing routines. Friends can notice emotional withdrawal. The person at the center of the relationship may begin behaving differently without explaining why. Again, these were not automatically proof of criminal conduct. They were clues about the environment in which the killing occurred. And investigators would have to determine whether that alleged change could be independently corroborated. The next major question was the location of the shooting. Independence Community Park. That was where police said the argument occurred. That was where investigators believed the fatal shooting happened. The location mattered enormously. A homicide scene can preserve evidence long after people leave. Even if a suspect attempts to move a victim, the original location may still contain traces. Investigators could examine the ground. Nearby objects. Possible shell casings. Blood evidence. Vehicle positioning. Footprints. Surveillance coverage. Witness accounts. Anything capable of establishing where the shooting occurred and what happened immediately afterward. The scene could tell a story that